Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me here. As I'm capable of speaking Polish, but I've chosen to speak English, even though I did not attend your classes, I'm sorry, because I'm being paid now by international organization. Listen, I've prepared something like 7 pages of different comments. I will use just the first and the final page. I'm very grateful for the invitation, but frankly, listening to this discussion, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I'm like in between two giants, NATO and EU, representing OSCE. I hope at least you recognize the abbreviation, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. But I will still try to make a point that OSCE, regardless of all its problems at the moment, can contribute to a safer Europe, basically through conflict prevention, in the broad meaning of the term, but can also help NATO and EU to kind of work together better. But let me start with a few very selective comments on what has been said so far. Now, for the NATO-EU relationship as such, and I have some experience as far as CSDP is concerned from my years as the Polish MFA Director for Security Policy, and I have NATO experience as ASG Ops for 4 years. But this NATO-EU relationship, yes, there is an obvious institutional competition or institutional rivalry, but there are 2 other things which make things difficult. Political ambitions of certain participating states, and something that I don't think was mentioned today, renationalization of decision-making processes, first of all on security policy. This is a fact of life, whether we like it or not, and it does affect the EU, it does affect NATO, it does affect all of us. So those are 3 kind of fundamental problems in the NATO-EU relationship. Now, this obsession about EU, European Union autonomy, yes, it's still there, it's something that needs to be overcome, but let me assure you that it's getting better. How many years we are obliged to keep NATO secret? 7. It's 2012, and that happened in 2005, so actually I think I can tell you the story. Back in 2005, the level of obsession on the autonomy of decision-making, both at NATO and at the EU was such that when both of us, EU and NATO, when we were working on our possible assistance as far as security is concerned to the African Union, at the request of African Union, myself traveling to Addis Ababa as NATO representative, I would never tell my counterpart at the EU, Claude France Arnoux, where and when I would be going there to talk to African Union guys, and she would do the same. Only something like a year later, we started to exchange some information, at least, about what we were doing. So things are getting better, even though rather slowly. Now, there are all kinds of references throughout today to the smart defense. I would say that we need, first of all, smart security policy, and only then smart defense. But whether EU is an effective actor in the security field, once more, I may be politically incorrect, but for me, the crux of the matter is that EU, as an institution, is extremely effective in crisis management and conflict resolution in those cases where the future EU membership of a country or countries from a given region affected by a crisis can be used as a leverage. And that's the situation in the Balkans. That's to a certain extent the situation around Moldova, Transnistria. It's not the case in Georgia. It's not the case with Nagorno-Karabakh. It's not the case in other places. So there are cases where EU can be an effective security actor, but for the time being, the most efficient weapon, instrument for the EU is the leverage of the possible future membership in the European Union. And it is a value-added, if you wish, element of the European Union involvement. Now, whether this agreement, NATO-EU Berlin Plus, yes, of course it's outdated, but the fact that it was never used for Kosovo and Afghanistan, I mean, it could have never been used. regardless of political intentions, because first, in Afghanistan, there was never a question of EU military involvement, so Berlin Plus use was absolutely out of question and never considered. Second, the sequence of events for Kosovo, when the EU actually decided to move there, remember those days, we were full of hopes that the EU High Representative, Peter Faith, will actually take care about the future of Kosovo. It was developments on the grounds that never allowed that to happen, so there was so there was never a point for kind of further or deeper NATO-EU coordination in line with Berlin Plus. Finally, one more comment, Turkey. Apart from the institutional context of Turkish position, Turkish importance, and so on, from the perspective of the OSCE, I think what we can say that we see that something happening at the moment is much more active Turkish involvement in all kinds of efforts to resolve certain complicated conflicts, like in Nagorno-Karabakh. So it's not just institutional setting. We see Turkey actually questioning the current negotiating format for Nagorno-Karabakh, not least because of certain political developments back in France. Now, finally, moving to the EU, to the OSCE. Now, from the OSCE perspective, actually, from our perspective, from the OSCE angle, it's kind of telling to see how those two organizations, EU and NATO, actually, how do they function in the OSCE framework? How do they present themselves? OSCE has been the first ever testing ground for the EU common foreign and security policy. It was in the OSCE at the meetings of our Permanent Council that the EU started to make common joint statements. And this process continued. Now, whenever we have, actually every week, whenever we have a discussion on whatever political, security-related issues, there's always a statement on behalf of the European Union. And then none of the EU states is allowed to make any further comments. So there's a full political coordination, and the EU is using OSCE for that purpose. NATO, at the same time, continues to, if not coordinate, but also coordinate to a certain extent, that at least exchange information on all military aspects of European security, and first of all, on arms control. There's still this NATO caucus meetings, if you wish. But those, I mean, the idea was always to discuss within the NATO format, to discuss arms control. And with the collapse of the CFE regime and with the non-implementation of confidence and security building measures on the Vienna document, and with a de facto, almost not functional open skies treaty, there is less and less issues on which NATO could actually work in Vienna. But from that angle, EU is always making a case to be visible politically in the OSCE, and NATO is always looking at arms control or military aspects of security, also in Vienna in the OSCE context. Now, how OSCE, in the past, OSCE had its glory days basically in the 90s, and OSCE was instrumental in this post-Cold War transformation. The current condition of the OSCE is, to put it mildly, rather bad. Who is to be blamed for that? The participating states, who have no idea how to use this rather loose, flexible framework, OSCE, as one of the instruments of their security policy. Back in the 90s, there were all kinds of ambitions on the OSCE. Now, the problem we have is that our distinguished participating states really have no idea how to use this. Of course, each and every OSCE capital would immediately remember about OSCE whenever there will be elections going somewhere, because there will be an expectation that ODIHR would go and make a report. There will be always people in capitals all of a sudden remembering OSCE when there will be a kind of an ethnic dispute, because we have an institution of High Commissioner for National Minorities who is doing quite useful but quite confidential work at the same time. But in general, or as a principle, there's a shortage of ideas how to use OSCE, except for the ideas presented at the Munich conference just a few days ago, when the Euro-Atlantic Security Initiative, EASY, came with a project on Euro-Atlantic Security Community, by the way, very much in line with the kind of discussion being developed by PISM and the French, German, and Russian think tanks in the OSCE context. So EASY, with Sam Nunn, John Korblum, Igor Ivanov, and Madame Rothfeld, they came with this concept of Euro-Atlantic Security Initiative, and they actually pointed out to the OSCE as a framework to develop this concept. Now, without going into any kind of details about the concept of security community as such, why it is important, in my view at least? It is important because it does focus our attention, as far as security is concerned, not on rigid institutions, treaties, or structures. That's not what we need in the 21st century. What we need in the 21st century is processes, norms, values, standards, and that's what is easy about. And they point out to the OSCE as a possible framework for developing this idea, because it's a flexible framework, it's not legally binding institution, it's all politically binding. Second, OSCE can be what the participating states would like it to be, so we can easily change. Then we are very much about norms, principles, and values. We have instruments to do something which is one of the most important challenges for the European stability in the longer-term perspective, reconciliation. That is something that is missing in Europe still, despite from obvious Franco-German process, if you say so. Apart from the famous Franco-German case, and certain efforts between Russia and Poland, which started something like 2 years ago. And the other reason for pointing out at the OSCE is the point that EASY made in their report, once more the one presented in Munich, which is that in the 21st century, one can hardly imagine a negotiated solution to any of the current protracted, frozen, you don't like the term frozen, okay, protracted conflicts, be it over Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh, Georgia, or whenever. Yes, negotiating formats exist, and they are important, but they do not help to solve the conflict. They help to kind of ease the tension. They prevent a reoccurrence of, if you wish, hot crisis. Why it's not, but let me rephrase it, why it's not thinkable to contemplate a negotiated solution? Because any solution negotiated by diplomats and politicians in the small office would have to be shared with the society. And what we're missing in all the conflict resolution efforts so far is the involvement of civil society. Whatever the negotiators will agree even on Nagorno-Karabakh, try to sell it to Azeris, Armenians, and those living in Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's us, OSCE, who have instruments to involve civil society, not least because we have, at the moment, I guess, 17 field operations and presences, including in Armenia, Azerbaijan, all the Central Asian states, and so on. Judging by the way you look at me, yes, I have to move to the final page. So altogether, the only point I wanted really to make today is that please look at the OSCE as a framework that could help both European security as such, but could also help EU and NATO to find the best possible ways to cooperate. One way of doing this would be to develop this Euro-Atlantic security community concept, which I think is very promising, provided, once more, that's my final sentence, we'll look at it as a process, as not yet another formal negotiation on formal treaty, on formal structure. Thank you.